Real stories of werewolves, of Dogman history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
I saw a Dogman riding a bear. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have seen a Dogman a number of times in my life, as I am a hunter in Pennsylvania. It was a different Dogman each time, and I'll tell you about all my sightings. The most recent one was the craziest, so either stick around for that or fast forward, because that last one was the kicker. I saw the beast displaying intelligence by riding the back of a big old bear. The Dogman is not just an apex predator, and he can use his hands. He's developing a culture that might someday rival our own. He's more than just a wild animal, and I hope after you hear my stories that you'll understand why I say that. If I'm especially lucky, I may convince some of you out there to agree with me about this magnificent but terrifying beastman. I've always loved spending time outdoors, and there's nothing I enjoy more than hunting deep in the woods in my home state of Pennsylvania. We've got some of the best game land here, and large areas set off by the state to be used for hunting by the citizens who live off the land here. I've been doing it for years, but I must admit, I never thought I'd encounter anything quite like what I stumbled upon during a solo hunting trip in State Game Land 71 near Allenport. It was early morning, just as the sun was peeking over the horizon, and I had already been perched up in my tree stand for a good hour or so. The air was crisp, and I could feel the familiar thrill of the hunt coursing through my veins. That's when I heard it, the distinctive sound of snapping twigs and rustling leaves. I held my breath and strained to listen, trying to determine the source of the noise. As the sounds grew closer, I began to feel uneasy. This wasn't the typical noise of a deer or any other game animal. This was something else entirely. I felt a chill run down my spine as the crunching footfalls became louder, and then, for no reason I could discern, things got eerily quiet, and I felt a foreboding sense of danger. That's when I saw it, a massive, feral wolfman, or maybe Dogman, standing just a few yards away. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. This creature was easily 6.5 feet tall, with thick, matted fur and glowing amber eyes. This looked like a werewolf, straight out of a horror movie. I scrambled to grab my rifle, but I was too slow. The creature had already started to advance toward my tree, and with each step, I could feel my heart racing faster and faster. I aimed my rifle, but my hands were trembling so much that I could barely focus on the target. Part of that stemmed from my unnatural fear, and part stemmed from the way it stood, like a man. If I shot it, what would I be shooting? Would I be committing a crime against the law, or even against God? I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and fired. But my indecision caused the shot to go wide, missing the creature completely. I didn't know what to do. I had never encountered anything like this before, and I was completely unprepared. I watched in horror as the creature let out a bone-chilling howl that made me want to faint dead away, and began to charge toward my tree stand. I fired again, but it had no effect. The creature was getting closer and closer, and I could see my life flashing before my eyes. Just when I thought it was all over, I heard another sound, the sharp barking of a dog. The upright creature stopped dead in its tracks, and for a moment, it seemed almost confused. Then, abruptly, it turned around and disappeared back into the woods. I sat there in my tree stand, completely shaken and dazed. What had just happened? I knew I needed to get out of there, and fast. I packed up my gear and made my way back to my car, feeling like something was watching me the entire time. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, lurking and waiting for its next victim. Over the following few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about that encounter. I did some research and discovered that there were stories of similar creatures in that area, but they were dismissed as legends or urban myths. I couldn't believe it. I had seen it with my own eyes. That creature was real. I also learned that the creature was not alone. There were reports of an entire pack of these wolfmen, or dogmen, living on the wooded mountains of Pennsylvania. The locals each call them by their own names, and warn against venturing too far into those woods alone. But even with all the warnings and cautionary tales, I couldn't shake the pull of the hunt. I went back to State Game Land 71, armed with a new respect for the dangers that lurked in those woods. This time I came prepared. I had a hunting buddy with me, and we had brought extra rifles and ammunition. We set up camp in a secluded area, far from where I had encountered the creature last time. For the first few days, everything was quiet. We saw deer and other game animals, but no sign of the wolfman or dogman. Then when we least expected it, we heard it. A low growling, followed by the sound of twigs snapping underfoot. My heart raced as I remembered my previous encounter, but this time I was ready. We aimed our rifles and we waited, watching, as the creature emerged from the woods. It was just as massive and frightening as I remembered, but this time we were prepared. We fired off a volley of shots, and the creature let out an ear-splitting howl. It stumbled and fell to the ground, and we watched in amazement as it transformed, not into a human, but into a regular wolf. We stood there stunned, looking at it. And when it got up and walked away, we didn't try and stop it. We had no idea what that was. For weeks, we hunted and tracked these creatures, never encountering the wolfman or dogman again. But I knew they were still out there, waiting, in the shadows. Obviously, I had seen too much to dismiss them as mere legends, and I would always be wary of the dangers that lurked in the Pennsylvania woods. That all happened in the later 1980s, and to be honest, it was 15 or 20 years before I saw another one of those things, and in a completely different hunting area entirely. Having been an avid hunter all my life, there was nothing that brought me greater joy than exploring the wilderness alone, taking in the sights and smells of nature, bringing home the spoils of my hunt. So after I heard about the almost mythical hunting grounds of State Game Lands 305, just outside Mechanicsburg in Pennsylvania, I knew I had to check it out. I had heard rumors of strange and scary creatures lurking in those woods. Some people had even claimed to have seen a massive, feral, furry, white-furred wolfman or dogman with glowing amber eyes that roamed the hills and mountains. Even though I already had the experiences I described to you, publicly I didn't believe in such things. I told everyone that I was convinced that it was all just a marketing gimmick to attract more hunters to the area. Of course, when I would share my theory about this with others, they'd sort of look at me sideways and ask me what kind of hunter would be attracted to hunt in an area with a larger predator than himself, already claiming that as his own turf. I never had an answer to that question. In my mind by that point, I figured most werewolf stories were real, but I just didn't want to think about them. Wouldn't do any good getting myself upset about a creature that I had a 1 in 100 chance of ever even seeing again. But as I made my way up the mountain that day, something seemed off. The air was thick with the scent of fear and danger, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I tried to brush off the feeling, attributing it to my overactive imagination. As the sun sank into the horizon, I set up my camp up in the trees. I was there to hunt deer, but there was a nagging thought in the back of my mind reminding me that I was not the only predator in those woods. I brushed off my nagging thoughts like they were an annoying younger brother, and I tried to go to sleep. But the next morning my fears were validated. As I made my way down the hill, I spotted something moving in the woods. It was massive and furry, with glowing amber eyes that pierced through the shadowy area under the tree cover. I rubbed my eyes, convinced that I was just dreaming, or imagining things. But as that creature came closer, I felt like I had to pee really badly, because I knew I was not hallucinating. This was the feral, furry, white-furred wolfman or dogman that everyone had been talking about. Its fur was yellowy white, like a polar bear's fur. But the eyes were not pink. It was not an albino, just a rare and absolutely majestic, bear-sized canine, walking on his hind legs. I remember thinking that this breathtakingly beautiful creature was gonna rip me into a pile of ugly, bloody shreds if it got its claws sunk into me. I could feel my heart race as the creature closed in on me. It was massive, about the size of a fully grown grizzly bear, maybe larger. Its fur was thick and off-white, and its sharp teeth glinted in the sunlight. I knew that I had to climb up my tree higher to avoid its attack. My heart was pounding with fear. The creature was not far beneath me, and I knew that I had to act quickly if I wanted to survive. I found a sturdy tree limb above, and I began to climb. The beast was right behind me, snarling and growling. I could feel its hot breath on my heels. I willed my muscles to move faster, my hands gripping tightly onto those branches. Finally, I made it to the top. I looked down at the creature, hoping that it would go away. But it just stood there, staring up at me, with its glowing amber eyes. Since it was not an albino, I knew that it could see me perfectly well. In fact, it could probably see me a lot better than I could see it down below. I stayed up in my tree until it left, my heart racing with fear. I felt as though I had encountered something beyond my wildest nightmares, something that could not exist in the real world. As the sun began to rise, I made my way back down the mountain, my mind reeling from what I had seen. I knew that I had to tell someone. The world needed to know that the creature was out there, on the prowl. But when I would tell my story, people would laugh and scoff. They told me I was making it all up, that there was no such thing as a feral, furry, white-furred wolfman or dogman living in the woods of Pennsylvania. This was my karma, this reaction, because I had made fun of others who told the same story before me. But I knew better now. I had seen 2 of these creatures with my own eyes by then, and I would never forget the fear and horror that had engulfed me that day. Now, all of these sightings so far were clearly of a predator, but an animal one, not an intelligent or human one. That all changed the day around 2005 or 2006, when I went hunting in State Game Lands 211, not too far from the Stony Mountain Fire Tower. That was the day I saw something that defied explanation and got me to thinking that the Dogman might be evolving into something equal to, or even superior to, us human beings. It was late one afternoon when I made my way into the woods over there to camp and hunt. I had been hunting in this area many times before, but this time felt different. There was a strange energy in the air, a feeling of unease that I couldn't shake. I ignored it and made my way to my tree blind, an old mini shack made of wood and metal that I had built years ago, up on a thick branch in a sturdy tree. It was my safe haven, my sanctuary in the wilderness. I had been sitting in my tree blind for a while, my rifle ready, waiting for the perfect opportunity to take down a buck deer. I had seen a few in the distance, but they were too far away to take a shot. That's when I heard the sound of something moving in the bushes. First I thought it might be a deer, but the noise was too loud, too heavy. It almost sounded like a bear. I looked out of my window in my shack and I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. It was a bear, only it wasn't alone. There was a man-sized wolf man riding it, like a cowboy, on a wild stallion. The creature had orangey-brown fur and eyes as black as night. It was at once just like the previous Dogman I had seen, and yet, at the same time, it was like nothing I had ever seen before. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was hallucinating, but when I opened them again, the creature was still there, chasing down a large buck deer. The bear galloped as fast as a horse, the wolfman on its back never losing its grip. They were clearly working together, like they were a team. It was terrifying, but at the same time, I was fascinated. Even after the wondrous things I had seen, which I've already told you about, I had never been so close to something so otherworldly before. The chase lasted for what felt like hours, with both running in circles beneath my viewpoint, but it was probably only minutes. Finally, the bear caught up with that deer, and the wolfman jumped off its back in a flash, attacking the deer with a ferocity that was both admirable and frighteningly unnerving. It was brutal, the sound of bones cracking and flesh tearing, filling the air. I couldn't watch anymore, and I turned away, my stomach churning. Even after all my years in nature, there was something disquieting about the glee that those two took in dismembering what had been a beautiful being just seconds earlier. Eventually, the noises stopped, and everything was quiet again. I waited in my tree blind for what felt like hours, sunk down low and hiding, too scared to look and too nervous to make a move. Finally, when it was dark, I emerged from my hiding place and made my way back to my truck. The sun had set, and the moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the forest. It felt like something was watching me, following me, but I heard nothing, and I locked myself into the car, finally feeling that at least I now had a barrier between myself and that Dogman Bear team. I drove home, my mind racing with thoughts of what I'd seen. I knew that no one would believe me if I told them, after my experiences telling people about my earlier sightings, so I kept it to myself. If nobody believed what happened to me before, then they definitely were never going to believe me when I said the Dogman rode the bear like a cowboy riding a bucking bronco. But the memory of that day stayed with me, haunting me for years afterward. Years went by, and I continued to hunt in the state game lands of Pennsylvania. I hadn't seen anything like that for a long period of time, but I always felt like something was watching me, lurking in the shadows. It made me nervous, but I never gave up my hobby. I loved the thrill of the hunt, the sense of adventure, the feeling of being in nature. One day just last year, I was out hunting with a group of friends. It was early in the morning, and we had split up to cover more ground. I was alone walking through a densely wooded area when I heard something moving in the bushes again. This time I was ready. I raised my rifle, aiming at the spot where the noise was coming from. Suddenly a figure emerged, walking toward me. It was the wolfman from the third encounter, only this time he wasn't riding a bear. He was alone, walking on his two legs, like a human. I couldn't believe my eyes. I had never seen anything like this before, and I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or awake. It had already seen me, and my instinct was to bolt and run away as fast as I could. Instead, it felt as though my feet were cemented to the ground, and that I had no choice but to remain where I was. I don't know if that was a product of my own fear, but it felt like I was being controlled in that instant. The creature stopped in front of me, looking at me with his black as night eyes, and I had no choice but to look back into them. They were not glowing. They were infinitely dark, and it felt like when I looked into them, that I could see myself spinning and falling down a deep well. There was something in those eyes, something that felt like glue or magnets, something I couldn't quite understand. It felt like the Dogman was trying to tell me something, but before I could react, he turned around and disappeared into the woods, leaving me alone and more confused than ever. I haven't seen the dog-headed wolfman again since, but the memory of that day stays with me forever. I still go hunting in the state game lands of Pennsylvania, but now I always keep my eyes peeled, wary of what might be lurking in the darkness. The world is full of mysteries, of things we can't explain, and I learned that the hard way. But I'll always be grateful for these encounters, for these brushes with the unknown. They make me realize that there's more to life than what you get taught in your schools or your textbooks. There's a whole lot about life that you aren't ever going to learn about unless you go out there and let it find you. You aren't going to find out that the Dogman is real by hearing about it on an internet video. The only way you'll know for sure is by seeing one yourself. And there's no way to go out and see one of these things without placing yourself at risk. The Dogman isn't going to ring your doorbell and provide you with proof of his identification. The only way you'll ever know for sure is if you see one yourself. But if you see one yourself, you might not return to tell the story. And even if you do, most people are only going to laugh at you anyway, especially behind your back. I overheard my extended family talking about me when they thought I was sleeping one Christmas, and believe me, I was surprised and hurt at how crazy they all assume that I am, just because I can look them each in the eye and tell them with great earnestness. I saw a Dogman riding a bear.
Comfort t-shirt for 2024. Scary Skull logo is back for more. You won't find the sucker in any store except for our online store with scary merch galore. No matter how big or small you are, we've got a Scary Story Skull t-shirt in your size. Modeled here by actual werewolves, but made to fit humans as well. A link is in the description. T-shirt for 2024. Scary Skull logo is back for more. You won't find the sucker in any store except for our online store with scary merch galore.
Mother Bear versus Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got the mother of all Dogman stories here, and you can take that in a number of different ways. Please don't mistake that jovial introduction to mean that my story isn't scary, because this was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. I've been watching some of your back episodes, and I saw the one about that drive-in in Pennsylvania. I watched it with interest because that's not the only drive-in movie theater in the middle of a bunch of farms in PA. I grew up in a town named Gratz, and right nearby is the Skyview Drive-In. It has a lot in common with the one you described, and the folks who work there are very nice. I don't know if they're open right now. I would guess not. But I'm not in PA anyway. I left before the lockdown set in. I hope they can open soon because they are loved by the community up there. I don't just mention the Skyview Drive-In randomly, as my story happened fairly close to there. You could say it happened within walking distance of the drive-in, as though anyone walked to a drive-in. See, the town I used to live in, Gratz, is just west of the Skyview and just north of a weird patch of woods. My friend we can call Marcus and I used to call it dramatic names like the Woods of Weirdness and the Forest of Mystery, because it felt to us that something weird happened to us almost every time we went there. I mean, we had campgrounds in the area, But Marcus and I would go for outdoor sleepovers in that weird patch of woods to the south. I don't think we were supposed to be there, but nobody ever kicked us out, so we kept going back. Plus, we liked the weird stuff. It never reached paranormal levels, so it's pointless to mention any of the events other than to explain myself. Like, one time we found a single sneaker. It was a blue Pro Keds sneaker, and I don't remember if it was left or right. It looked fairly new, but a little worn in, and it was a high top laced and tied all the way up to the top. We made up stories of how it got there like that. Maybe the guy's foot evaporated, leaving the sneaker behind, but his other foot was fine, so he went home. Stuff like that. Nothing to write a scary story about, but enough to entertain bored teenagers and keep us coming back to the weird woods. Anyway, the scary thing that happened to me didn't happen when Marcus was there at all. I had come back home from college. I was 22 years old, and Marcus had gotten married and moved away somewhere out west, I think. The marriage didn't last, but he never came back as far as I know. I wanted to hang with him, but it wasn't an option, and I ended up walking out of town toward the woods with my sleeping bag in my backpack. I was going to sleep in the woods of weirdness one last time, say goodbye to Marcus and my teenage years, then wake up the next morning, ready to be a man. Little did I know how real my rite of passage was about to become. I guess I should mention here that it was dumb of me to go out camping alone in the woods. I guess I thought of that forest as my backyard, since it was walkable from the house I grew up in, and I had spent so much time there. However, in Pennsylvania, bears will walk right through your backyard sometimes in the spring and summer. I'm not even kidding. You can go look it up, and I'll wait right here for you. Of course, they're not supposed to be walking around in the middle of the night with their cub or cubs, as far as I know, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. I picked a spot near where I thought we had camped before, did a little tribute to Marcus in the dark, then settled into my sleeping bag to sleep directly on the ground, staring up through the trees at the stars. It's an incredibly powerful and surreal feeling to be there in the woods, staring up into infinity, and although I think it's something everyone should try at least once, you should only try it in a safe way. Maybe if you and a group of friends decide to do it, that might be okay. You have to remember, you can get trodden on by deer, and a deer hoof is as hard as a baseball bat. You shouldn't try it unless you're a very advanced camper, and even then, have GPS and a personal locator on you in case of emergencies. I might also suggest a means of defense, but I don't know if you're allowed to talk about that on YouTube, so I'll have to leave that part up to all your imaginations out there. It was dark out when I woke up. At first startled to be looking up at trees and stars. Then I remembered where I was and realized why I had awakened. Climbing out of my bag so I could go relieve myself, the sound of the crickets was just incredibly loud. It felt like quadraphonic times 12. The sound surrounding me, the chirping coming from everywhere. It was both comforting and unnerving at the same time. I remember walking and stumbling in the dark far enough away from where I was sleeping that I hoped I wouldn't smell it when I was trying to go back to sleep. Then I proceeded to do my business. Obviously, this was quite a relief, and I noticed that the sound of what I was doing had superseded the sounds of the crickets. When I wound down, I noticed that the chirping didn't return as I had expected it to. I sighed aloud, feeling much better, but as I made that noise, I thought I heard someone say something off to my left. Stunned and surprised, I looked over there with wide open, fully dilated, and panicked eyes, but I didn't see anyone there. It was very dark in that direction, too. Had I imagined hearing it? I remembered I was in the forest of mystery, chuckled internally, then zipped up my pants. As I zipped up, though, I heard that voice again to my left, through the woods. I couldn't understand what they had said, but in my sleepy mind, it sounded just exactly like my old friend Marcus. I didn't know whether to run toward him or run all the way home in my bare feet. I missed him, but at the same time, he wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be across the country with his new wife. It couldn't have been him, and it would make no sense for me to go looking any closer for that reason. I walked in that direction anyway, calling out, "Hello?" I meant it to sound self-assured, but it sounded timid, small, and frightened. Probably just as well. I didn't even know who I was calling out to. I remember staring where I was stepping on the ground, trying not to step on anything sharp or anything dead, and suddenly I took a turn around a tree, and I heard that voice again. Now, I could tell that it wasn't saying anything at all. It was roaring insanely, incoherently. I was standing about 3 feet away from the largest land predator I was up till then aware of existing in Pennsylvania. I had been hearing a bear roaring in the darkness, but only catching a bit of it each time. Taken out of context and from a distance, almost any animal can sound sort of human, at least in split-second segments. We do all express ourselves with lungs and vocal cords, so it's only natural to find some overlap here and there. But to be wondering if my old buddy was pulling a trick on me, and then suddenly being confronted with the musky odor of the huge hairy meat eater, and to see those long claws and massive jaws, either of which could snap me like a twig without extending much effort. I didn't know that bears were nocturnal. Wait, they aren't, are they? Did this one have rabies or some mind-destroying illness? Why was it there? And why was it roaring at me? These were the kinds of half-thoughts flanking around in my panicked and empty tin can of a brain. I didn't know what to do. Then the bear roared again, and I did something anyway. I dove sideways to my left, thinking I could push through a bush there and run away, but finding it impossible to pass through. I shrunk down instead, hiding underneath the shrubbery as though that were going to protect me. The ground recessed under me a bit, and I was able to be partially covered by the leaves and feel some imaginary sense of half-safety. It wasn't working, though. I was still mostly exposed. My heart was beating so fast as I ducked my head down and waited for something very terrible and very painful to happen. I heard the bear roar again. I felt its paws beat the ground like it was a bass drum, and my face was wet with tears. Why was it here? And why was it so angry? And then, to my right, came a deep, scary, barking sound so loud that I bounced off the ground in shock. Looking over there, I saw a dog every bit as big as that black bear. Beyond the dog, I saw a 3 or 4 foot bear cub, standing up on its hind legs, and looking cute like Winnie the Pooh. It was just completely out of place cuteness in this scene of utter horror. But that cute little real-life teddy bear was the center and the cause of this nightmare that I found myself in the middle of. I had walked in between a mother bear and her cub, and the only reason I was still alive was that I wasn't the first to have done it. That dog was. I had to take a number and wait online to be mauled, I suppose. I tried again to find a way backward through the bush I was using as cover, but found it just as impassable as before. I was whimpering like a wounded poodle, practically trying to will myself through the vegetation to safety, but no go. I wanted to get out of there before someone won that standoff I was witnessing and decided to come for me next. There was no way to exit the scene without first climbing out in the direction of this developing battle, and I was way too scared to move an inch toward either of those monsters. I want to say that both animals were colored and sized so similarly that it almost was like 2 black bears fighting in some ways, but the dog's ears stood up tall and pointy like a wolf's, and bear's ears just don't do that. Plus, the dog had a kind of mane of fur around its neck, giving it a lion-like regality. I had never seen a dog as big as a bear before, and I don't think I'd seen one with a mane like that either. Although the same size roughly, The dog's body was not barrel-shaped. It was like a very fit but very trim black dog. The front and back legs, the chest, rib cage, there was nothing about the animal that looked like anything but an immense black canine. I was watching a bear versus a dog, not a bear versus a bear. Now, I want it clear that up till this point, the only ones who had been on their hind legs were me and the little cub. Mama bear and the big black dog were both on all fours. I was in no way thinking I was seeing Dogman versus a bear. I thought I was seeing maybe Black Shuck versus a bear, possibly, but most likely just a dog that grew extra large. The most remarkable scene I have ever witnessed. While I was sunk as small as I could make myself down on the ground, I stared up and saw that black bear rise up on its hind legs, apparently intending to scare the large canine off. What happened next changed my worldview and paradigm and anything else in my life. I was one person before it, and another person after. And this life-altering sequence went like this. I turned my horrified glance from the now bipedal bear, and to my right. There, I saw the lion-like dog's eyes glow like something out of a CGI fantasy film. It looked like he turned them on or something, like he pulled a light switch and click, instant glowing Batman eyes. I couldn't even breathe. I thought I was hallucinating, and that the hallucination was going to eat me alive. Then, that dog reared back like a horse does when it's panicked or angry, and I covered my head, thinking he was going to come down again hard. That never happened. When I didn't hear what I had expected to, I opened my eyes and saw that the big black dog had stood up on his hind legs too. Only when he didn't seem to be focusing as much on balancing himself as the bear was. This dog with a mane and glowing eyes didn't seem to have as much of an issue with standing. Apparently sensing it now had an advantage, the bipedal dog charged forward savagely, displaying the largest and most primeval-looking set of teeth I ever laid eyes on. The two of them were about to engage in a physical battle way, way up there in the air. I decided that this would be my best moment to attempt to escape the scene. So I scuttled along the edge of the bush like the cockroach I felt like in that situation, and I climbed around that tree and ran back to my sleeping bag, stubbing a number of toes and falling in the dirt another time. I probably would have gotten back there faster and less painfully if I had walked slowly, but fight or flight had kicked in, and I was trying to fly through those woods. I stopped at my sleeping bag to put my boots on, and I found it extremely hard to get my fingers to work, pulling the laces tight and tying them. I heard Marcus calling to me from the woods again, and my hands shook even more drastically. I knew I was hearing the bear. I knew that fight was still going on. I knew I was on the turf not only of that mother bear, but also an apparent actual real-life Pennsylvania dogman. I ended up carrying my boots and bag and backpack and walking out of the woods in my bare feet. I could walk all right. I just couldn't think or make my fingers do what I wanted them to do. I remember hearing the crickets coming back the further I got from that scene. Never was that sound so beautiful to me as right then. When I got out of the woods, I remember sitting down on the sidewalk and finally getting my shoes back on and my bag and my backpack. Life was returning to normal, I thought. Then I corrected myself. My new life was beginning. I didn't put it all together that night, but I seemed to have sort of had a death and rebirth ritual kind of thing. I went in a boy and came out a man. A man cockroach? Running away from monsters? Well, maybe so, but it could have ended so many other ways. I might not have survived my rite of passage at all. The further I get away from Gratz, the more I think about it. I miss that place. Not enough to actually go there while this virus thing finishes playing out, but I still miss it a lot, even though I was a pitiful, nervous wreck after the incident on the night it happened. I've grown fond of retelling the story. Girls seem to love it, or at least they humor me and pretend to. If they seem like they're getting into it, I tend to leave out the parts about me crying and scuttling away like a little roach. I make it sound more like I was brave, for entertainment purposes. Even though that night, and for a year or two after, I was really traumatized by what happened, or maybe by what could have happened. These days, it feels more like a badge of honor. After all, how many guys can tell a bar story this badass? Show me anyone else who had a front row seat to see Mother Bear versus Dogman.
What better than a waffle on your plate? A waffle on your head could be just great. It's the waffle bee from NYC. Scary fashion for spring, you see. Black, birch, camel, navy, mustard, heather, gray. One of these colors is just your way. Wear this hat and you'll be it. Link in the description for this vid. Get your own scary stories, waffle beanie today.
I saw Dogman chase a bear up a tree. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a New Jersey Dogman story for you that also involves a black bear. This happened around 15 years ago, so I might get some of the details wrong, but I'll try to remember as well as I can. I had been entertaining a crazy friend of mine who had struck it rich and bought his own small plane. We were having a wild week of partying when he got a sudden phone call that ruined the mood. He insisted that he had to fly out of there right away and asked me to give him a lift to the airport that's out near Crossley Nature Preserve. I remember I was driving along some highway. Looking at Google Maps, I'm gonna guess that we were on County Road 530 on that gloomy evening. We came upon a sort of a dirt road coming off of the highway, and my pilot buddy insisted we take it. I was skeptical, but he insisted it was a shortcut. Well, it was anything but that. In fact, if you ever find yourself on County Road 530 in Toms River, New Jersey, don't take the right onto the dirt road. Besides the fact that I think it might be a private road, there's also the story of the bear and the Dogman that I'm about to tell you. Buckle your safety belt, because here's where the action starts. The so-called road was more like the driveway from hell. My car was bouncing, I was hearing gravel and pebbles pinging my underside, and I was not seeing how this was going to end up leading us to the airport. In fact, it does not, but I was just going on instinct when I felt that way on that night. We didn't have GPS, we didn't have maps, we were making it up as we went along. We were wasting our time, yes, but we were also unwittingly driving straight into some very real danger. Around a slight turn in the road, we saw, in progress, a tree tipping over and falling down. My pilot friend at first shouted timber as a joke, and I honestly expected to see a lumberjack holding an axe standing at the foot of it. I did not see a lumberjack at the bottom, though. What I did see was a big old black bear holding on for dear life at the top. Needless to say, I stopped the car as I couldn't risk getting any closer to the falling tree or the bear. Both of them came to a generally gentle landing, and the bear took off running to our left, zooming directly up the trunk of another tree on that side of the road. You could tell that the poor thing was in an absolute state of panic, and at first, I assumed that this was because it had just survived the tree fall. That would shake anybody up, or so it would seem. Then again, I once saw footage on the local news about a lady here in New Jersey whose cat scared a bear up a tree. So, I figure with bears sometimes being very skittish, It could have been almost anything that spooked him in the first place. Maybe a raccoon, maybe a rabbit. But there was something far more frightening in those woods on that night than any kind of rodent. And now, finally, he, she, or it makes their big appearance, leaping, running, and climbing over the felled tree. There scrambled another large creature. It was every bit the size of the black bear, possibly larger. It was covered in fur like the bear, but this fur was browner and longer than the bear's. Well, in spots at least. It seemed longest around the lower belly and the upper legs, and then again on the top of the head, down the neck and the upper shoulders, giving it sort of a lion's mane effect. This was not a cat, though. There was nothing feline about this creature. No, it was neither feline nor ursine. It was some third kind of thing. I mean, obviously it could not have been a bear, as I was seeing a bear, with the same eyes that I was seeing this thing with, and my eyes were assuring me that these were separate kinds of animals. "It's a werewolf," whispered my friend in the passenger seat, and I looked back at the creature, uncertain if I agreed with his classification. It was an animal, as far as I could tell, and not a human being. I suppose humans are animals too, so I should say it was an animal of a different kind from us. I always thought that werewolves were human, or part human. This was more like a big dog, or a prehistoric giant brown fox, maybe? It was more that than a wolfman. It did walk upright, and the American werewolf in London was down on all fours, so my friend wasn't off base with his classification. I just felt in the heat of the moment that we were witnessing a rare predator, one that at least sometimes hunts other predators. I did not see him as supernatural, although he, she, or it was as frightening and as fast as if it did have magical or paranormal abilities. Its eyes glowed, though, I can't deny that. That must be why my friend used the word werewolf, and why he clearly did think that we were seeing something closer to a ghost or alien than another forest animal like a black bear. The bear seemed to think he was overmatched, that's for sure, although, like I said, I saw a bear on the evening news one time that felt he was overmatched by a house cat. Then again, maybe that cat had supernatural powers, it's just a thought. So, the head of the manimal was very dog-like, with upright, pointed ears on top of its head. It ran, while holding its claws out in front of it, occasionally climbing with them. They had incredibly long and sharp-looking claws hanging out of the end, every bit as long as a bear's claws, possibly longer. They reminded me of images I'd seen of reconstructions of ancient, prehistoric sloths. I don't think we were viewing a sloth of any kind. I'm just saying, imagine claws as long as those on an extinct giant sloth coming out of the front paws of this upright running dog. That's what I remember. I do not recall if the thing had thumbs or any of that stuff. I presume it did not. The way it sped across the tree was almost as though it were lighter than air. That isn't a perfect way to explain it, but it seemed to be able to move faster than any creature I'd observed up to then, or have observed since then. The entirety of all this stuff I'm trying to remember for you took maybe 10 or 12 seconds. I mean to say that once the bear touched down, through my buddy whispering that it was a werewolf, through to the Dogman practically flying across the road and reaching the bottom of the tree that the bear was climbing up, all that took maybe 12 seconds total, probably not even that. The Dogman slammed into the tree trunk hard, causing reverberations to swing the upper third of the tree fairly violently. The bear foolishly climbed even further up, to the even thinner part of the trunk, and it was clear it would break off sooner or later. The Dogman was hugging the tree trunk and forcing it back and forth rhythmically. The bear was complaining loudly, in the way bears do when they are quite upset. Someone grabbed my shoulder and shook it. Coming out of my stunned reverie, I realized my pilot friend was still there. He calmly suggested that we back up out of there as slowly and quietly as we could, so as not to distract the Dogman from his intended prey. That made sense to me. The longer we stayed there, the more of a chance something terrible would happen to us. The fact that this had to be pointed out to me illustrates how stunned I was in that moment. I really was a bit zombified by what I was witnessing. I had even lost touch with my fight or flight instinct. So at the suggestion of my friend, I drove in reverse until we got back to the main road, and we traveled the rest of the way to the airport in utter silence. He didn't seem to be in as much of a rush as he had been, and it was all I could do, just pay attention to the road and the wheel and the gas and the brake. And then, that was it. That friend and I drifted apart, and I never saw that Dogman again. I never heard of anyone else seeing one near Toms River, New Jersey either, even though there are a couple of nature preserves right there in the vicinity. Did we even see a natural animal anyway? That's up for debate. I still lean toward thinking it was a flesh and blood beast, but I can't prove to you that it wasn't some sort of lycanthrope. The only thing I can tell you for sure is I saw a Dogman chase a bear up a tree. Grizzly bear versus the Wendell werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I witnessed a battle between two real-life kaiju, and it really blew my mind. I saw a genuine predator turf battle between a grizzly bear and what I could only assume was an actual Dogman or werewolf. The only reason I think I survived was because the situation between the two large carnivores was so intense. Neither of them even noticed me until I'd gotten a safe distance away. I'm being forced to call the animal the Wendell werewolf because my wife thinks that makes it sound more memorable. But the event actually took place to the southeast of Wendell, which is in British Columbia in Canada. It's just a wee bit north of the United States, not very far. Where I saw the two creatures was at a natural area called Arrow Mountain. I'm a fairly experienced camper and hiker, and I was in the area alone the first week of this year. My wife and I decided we needed a break after the holidays, so we each took off in different directions, her to her mother's house, and me to the wilderness where I hoped to be alone for a while. I do enjoy camping with friends, but this time I went specifically to find some solitude. I know how to camp in such a way that only professional trackers can even notice that I'm in a given area. I don't set campfires, I cover my tracks, there's a whole lot of things. So I was up pretty high on Arrow Mountain, and I was feeling in a state of bliss, just me and nature chilling out together. And then, two very natural creatures came racing and bounding up the hill from below so suddenly and so loudly that I was up and running to my right for cover before I knew what it was that was crashing in my direction. When I felt far enough away and had a large enough tree to hide behind and peek out from, I looked out and saw a huge, squirrel gray colored wolf straining to run uphill. My first thought was dire wolf, just because that was something I had heard about on the Discovery Channel that I thought was a giant prehistoric wolf. I've read since then that they weren't actually as large as the wolf that I saw. This was a gray wolf, almost as big as a horse, basically. I was watching it in profile, struggling to move higher on the hill as fast as it could go, and I wondered where it was going to and why it was in such a rush to get there. Crashing out of the woods behind the huge wolf and to my right in my field of vision was a huge blonde bear. It must have been a grizzly, but this was the granddaddy of all grizzly bears. Seriously, this was an oversized creature chasing another oversized creature. They were both clearly predators, so I must have been witnessing a territorial battle, and the grizzly seemed to be winning. The bear had the prehistoric wolf cornered up to my left, and the wolf turned around to face that charging bear. Then he took my breath away when he stood up on his hind legs, easily doubling his height and creating a very intimidating presence. The grizzly stood up on his hind legs as well, but slid backward on the steep incline, sliding and landing back down on all fours. He tried again and again to match the upright pose of the Dogman, but slipped a little further backward each time. The upright wolf had the most insane expression on its face, and it had its huge paws splayed wide to look almost like hands. I'd only ever seen a cat splay its claws that way before, but this creature appeared to be canine in all other aspects. He was making a horrible racket that I wouldn't exactly describe as barking. It was this sort of howling and yowling that, coupled with its body posture and crazy-looking eyes, seemed to be an expression of warning or threatening. It was almost as though he were speaking in complete sentences in some kind of dog language. I don't know exactly what he was saying, but I know it wasn't anything pleasant. When the bear had slid backward significantly enough, the huge gray upright wolf let out a howl that served as a battle cry. He threw himself forward in a charge on all fours toward the suddenly surprised and off-balance bear. Reversing into a hasty and panicked retreat, the two animals sped and leaped and slipped and skidded downhill to my right, causing a bit of a minor avalanche with their thunderous passing. As they both flew downward and out of my view, I saw them go straight off this cliff edge. I don't think they fell very far, but to be honest, I didn't stick around to find out. I think if the two of them fell off the mountain, it might have made the news, but maybe not. Sometimes, coming really close to complete disaster, but getting out of it unharmed, can work out some of the problems in your life, at least in the short term. It's a lot easier to appreciate my fellow human beings since I got home safe after seeing Grizzly Bear versus the Wendell Werewolf.
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright, right? Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
scary story.